Welcome, everybody, to What No One Told Us, I don't know. This week we have the privilege of interviewing my brother-in-law, Zach Barlow. He's also a good friend and a fellow engineer. Thanks for coming on, Zach.
Yep, good to be here.
I guess your education started at Virginia Tech with a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering, and then continued all the way up to the most educated What No One Told Us guest with a PhD, or Master's and PhD at Oregon State University. I don't know if you should probably tell what your thesis and dissertation were on at Oregon State, because I honestly don't know. The title is really long.
Oh, I don't remember the exact titles either. Those were definitely put in short-term memory. But my master's thesis was looking at highway worker safety, and so I did kind of a national synthesis on different safety programs at state Department of Transportation's. So that was, I did put out a survey to different safety officials at DOTs, and then did a lot of analysis and literature review based on that survey. So that was not that fun of a project. So I moved on to doing something different in grad school, which ended up turning into me doing a PhD, which was not necessarily what my plan was at the beginning. But that project was looking at how drivers are potentially distracted by drones flying near roadways. And
Wow.
so I did a couple different projects related to that, mostly utilizing a full-scale driving simulator. So my lab at Oregon State had a driving simulator, which was like a 2009 Ford Fusion cab, so the physical vehicle cab, set up on a motion base, and it had a bunch of like huge projector screens in front of it and behind it. And then it felt like you were driving a real car when you were in it. But it was all a lot of programming to put that together. So I programmed in the little flying drones onto the screens, and then had subjects run through the driving simulator. And I used eye tracking equipment to see how much they were or were not looking at the drones, and how much they were or were not distracted by them when they drove past.
That is, for some reason in my mind, what you did your PhD on was not related to that at all. I don't know what I thought you did, but it had nothing to do with drones.
I promise, Zach.
Yeah.
I told him that exact thing. I said that exact stuff to him. It's his fault for not remembering correctly.
That's no worries. People think that like, oh, you're doing this PhD, you're doing this like very high level, very fascinating, no one can understand research. And, my experience was, it's all just kind of simple stuff that no one has thought to do yet. And so they have to continue to make PhDs. So they have to keep finding things for us to do.
Okay. And then, so currently, I guess I have a little bit of insider knowledge on this. You're working for the family business, Ironside Engineering in Show Low. And then, just so I remember correctly, before or during college, I guess, you worked at VDOT, right? Virginia Department of Transportation, as an intern?
Yeah, so I interned there for 4 summers. So I got the internship there after my freshman year, and then had my final internship after my senior year after I graduated, before I started grad school.
Okay, so when you were...
And so I worked for them quite a bit. Like, I would work during the school years as well, kind of part-time, and then full-time during the summers.
So when you went for your bachelor's in civil engineering, and then after that went for your master's, like, did you have a certain idea in mind of what you wanted to do?
Not really. I didn't even really know that I was like super into engineering. I thought about a lot of different majors. So then I kind of narrowed it down to majors that I could like feasibly get a job with. And that kind of narrowed it down between like architecture and engineering. And then I realized that I wasn't artistic at all. And so I decided to go the engineering route.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that, like, you kind of had really three jobs, really. So you worked at VDOT, and then I would consider your master's PhD a job because you were fully funded, right? You were receiving a paycheck for that.
Yeah,
Small, but it existed.
Particularly in engineering school, you can get funded either through like being a teaching assistant or a research assistant to do your grad school, and that usually pays for your tuition and also provides you a living stipend on top of that. So for me, it kind of varies from school to school and program to program, but my salary was like in the upper 20s, like upper 20 grand a year, plus tuition on top of that. So tuition was covered, plus then there was the stipend to live on, which, you know, was enough to live on. It's not exactly an extravagant life, but I definitely made do. I mean, it's definitely better than paying to go to school, for sure. So
that's definitely true.
Yeah. So starting at your VDOT experience, what was that like? So what were you doing for them? Were you doing similar like research stuff to what you did in your upper level education, or did you, like, I guess I don't know what a VDOT or a VDOT engineer in particular would do?
Yeah, so I mean, because departments of transportation, they kind of do all aspects of civil engineering, and the way the internship program worked is I kind of got to choose what areas of kind of civil engineering I was interested in and got to go work in those different departments. And since I was there for so many summers and a little bit during the school year, I got to try a lot of different areas. And so I did a summer in construction engineering. I did a summer in structural engineering. I did a summer in traffic engineering. I did some work in environmental engineering and archaeology. I did a summer in history, the research history, actually, for history of transportation. So I worked at the DOT's research center. So they have a research center where they, again, do a lot of different types of civil engineering research. And I've always been interested in history, and so I kind of went outside the engineering world for a little bit and did history of transportation research. So that was kind of my first taste into research, which was part of what got me interested in grad school. But yeah, so it was a super awesome experience to be able to work at VDOT and get exposed to a lot of different areas, because civil engineering is one of the broader engineerings. And so it was cool to kind of get to experience those different pieces and figure out what I was and wasn't interested in.
So I want to back it up to the archaeology. Were we looking for dinosaurs, or what were we doing?
No, so as part of, I don't know how technical your guests want to hear about, but there's, for federal projects, for federal transportation projects, you have to do environmental reviews for them. And one of the aspects of environmental reviews is like cultural resource surveys. And so we had to go out like with a little screen, and we had to dig up some dirt and see if there were any like shards of pottery in certain areas where they were going to build transportation projects. And so it is all kind of still in the transportation world, but it is it's not exactly engineering. Yeah, it's technically archaeology. So I was working for I think he was an archaeologist who's employed by the DOT, and that was what his job was. So
I can definitely tell you some bad stories about that in Oklahoma, where there may have been some mounds that could have been related to Native Americans that got moved so that they could build certain projects.
Those mounds were over there when we found them.
Exactly.
That's bad. Did you ever find anything, Zach? Like, did you ever like come across shards or anything? Never.
Not a thing. So I was kind of disappointed. Dang. It was a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, like, everybody wants to be the intern that found the dinosaur in the middle of Virginia. I think if you're working in the archaeology department, that's kind of the dream, I would think.
Oh man, yeah, it was. Yes.
Like environmental engineering, is that like you're looking for like some special beetle or insect so that you can't, destroy its habitat and prevent you from building whatever you want? Or is that like environmental different aspect, not engineering related?
So it's definitely, it would be doing as part of the same process that the archaeology is done under. It's like, when's the project going to be done? Like, they might set months of the year that you're not allowed to work in a specific stream. If you're building a bridge over a river, like what months you might not be able to work in that because some type of fish are spawning. One of my vivid memories from that internship is I had to put on waders, and they had sandbagged in this little area because they were going to be pouring some concrete in it. And they're like, here, take this net and get all of the fish out from inside the sandbag area. And so I was just trying to catch all these little fish, and it took several hours, and I was freezing cold. And I was like, these fish don't even know what kind of service I'm giving to them. They're not grateful.
I am giving them life.
That sounds like fun almost.
Yeah, but I was like, do we need to save all of these fish? Because I was like, well, I think I got all of them. And the guy I was working for was like, well, there might be a couple more, so just keep trying to find them. And I was like, okay, try to get every last one out of here.
Oh, wow.
I think Jake and I definitely are not as... We're not as detail-oriented, and I think a few more fish may have passed away if we were tasked with emptying out the sandbagged area.
Yeah,
I just don't know if it was a case of when they don't have enough work for interns to do and they were trying to keep me busy. Who knows?
Yeah.
I kind of feel like it could have been that.
I feel like, looking back, it probably was.
Yeah. That's awesome. So then what inspired you to go to grad school, if that was something, or was it more of a default that you just didn't want to start doing something else?
Yeah, I had kind of figured out that I liked the history research summer that I did. That was a little bit different. I really enjoyed it. And I also liked the summer that I did in traffic engineering. And so I was like, well, I don't really know which of these I'd prefer to do, and so I just was kind of a little lost on what my plan was. And so kind of my initial, I was like, well, I should just go to grad school for historic preservation. Was actually what I initially was looking into for grad school. So that I could kind of move more in that direction. And so I applied to a couple schools for that. And then I kind of was gathering as things went along that you don't get funding or paid to go to grad school for historic preservation. And so, but by that point I was like, well, maybe going to grad school, I think that'd be good for me. I wanted to see a different part of the country. I had a job offer with VDOT to go back to them to work, and that stayed through when I went through grad school. And so I was like, well, I can always come back and do this, so might as well go explore and see something else, learn something else now.
Yeah, that's pretty nice that you would have
so that was really
afterwards.
Yeah, so that was really cool. And kind of gave me some flexibility. And so I took advantage of that flexibility to go to grad school. And when I realized that historic preservation wasn't going to give me any funding, I was like, well, I'll just go to engineering grad school and do traffic engineering. So,
was there a reason you wanted to go to Oregon State specifically, or was it the only one who provided full funding, or?
I got a couple funding offers. I kind of just applied to schools, just kind of scattered. I think I actually applied to Oregon State initially because the University of Oregon had a historic preservation program. And I was like, well, engineering programs usually pay you to fly out to interview and like visit, but historic preservation programs didn't. So I was like, well, maybe I can just like do two birds with one stone. I didn't actually end up ever applying to University of Oregon, but I ended up applying to Oregon State, and I got a funding offer there, and I was like, man, I'd never even been to Oregon before. And I was like, this seems like a cool experience, so why not move to the West Coast?
Okay, nice.
Yeah. And then was there much decision after your master's to continue into your PhD, or was it pretty logical that you wanted to continue all the way up and get a doctorate, presumably before you went back to VDOT, if that was still your plan at that point?
Definitely not the plan to get a doctorate, not even on the radar. It was like, oh, those crazy people that get PhDs, I'm never going to be one of those.
I say that. I say that a lot.
Yeah. I say that constantly as well.
Yeah, well, you should keep saying it. Don't ever let yourself stop saying it. But, no, so what kind of happened...
It sounds good, you know? I'm never going to be Dr. Frankenfield. Never.
That sounds pretty cool, though. So you should consider it just for the title. It just kind of worked out with the projects I was on, like the way the timing of the projects worked out. If I chose to stay for a PhD, my master's time frame ended up being quite a bit shorter, probably by 6 or 9 months. And so I kind of like made a deal with my advisor to like make that worker safety project my master's dissertation. It was originally not going to be my master's dissertation or master's thesis, and the distraction due to drones project was going to be my master's thesis, or at least a part of it. And so I kind of made a deal with him to make the safety project my master's thesis if I agreed to stay for a PhD. And so it kind of saved me some time. Plus, kind of around that same time, I met Cole's sister right around that same time. So that was like kind of influencing my decision-making processes. And I really loved, and I loved living in Oregon, and was like, I don't really want to move quite yet. And so it was a good excuse to stay there for a couple more years.
Okay.
So then what, if you kind of pretended you did your master's and that cost you that extra 6 months, how much longer than that was it for you to get your PhD?
I was in grad school for 4 years total. And so I did my master's in like a year and a half. And so it was 2.5 for my PhD, which it's very different for different people in different programs. I would say that's on the faster side. There are people who it takes them quite a bit longer to do the PhD. It just kind of depends on what projects you get put on, how many hiccups there are on the process. And I didn't have that many. So I was very thankful for that to help me get out. So yeah, so it's not always quite that quick to get through. But it can be if you push it a little bit and get a little lucky.
How long was your thesis and dissertation? Page count.
Pages.
Page count. I think they were
12-point font.
They were double spaced. The format was for them to be double spaced. I think my master's thesis was actually longer than my dissertation.
Oh god.
And my master's thesis was like 200 pages, and I think my dissertation was like 175.
Okay, I guess that's
maybe shorter. Maybe it was only 150, but
for some reason I was thinking like 300. 175 is still a lot of pages.
Yeah,
a master's thesis that's 200 pages long. I never met anyone else in grad school whose master's thesis was that long, so that was on the long side for sure.
Do you got a copy?
That's longer than like
hard copy book in your bookshelf?
Yeah, somewhere. I don't know that it's in this room, but I do have hard copies of it.
Sweet. Is it in a library somewhere? Like, could I go to my local library, order a copy of... No? Couldn't do it?
No.
It's in a journal, right?
Well, my dissertation is... The pieces of it are different journal articles, and so you could you could look up the articles in the journal, or you could access. I think you could access my thesis and dissertation on Oregon State University's library website. I think you can access them there.
We're going to link that in the description.
That's some real light reading.
Yeah. Most
just know
at Oregon State.
Oh gosh. If you read it, how many people you reckon have read it all the way through?
Have you read it all the way through?
He wrote it.
I think I've read it all the way through, but I'm not quite convinced. Probably 2. Me and my advisor are probably the only people who have read it all the way through.
Allie didn't read it all the way through?
No, she for sure didn't read it all the way through.
Jake, you would read a 200-page...
She would proofread it. If Hannah wrote a dissertation, I would...
200 pages, you'd read it through? When I'm talking reading it through, I'm talking start to finish. Like, not like I've probably seen every word on it. I'm talking like read it through. Like, you... I don't think you
for sure have not done that.
Oh.
I haven't done that to my own. Like...
Well, if you want to be dedicated, you can look it up, find it. Would it be under Google Scholar? Like, does Google Scholar know that you are a reputable source? Zachary Barlow is a reputable source?
Of course they do. He's a doctor.
I don't know that it might come up. I bet the technical, for my, either potentially the journal articles that comprise my dissertation, those would for sure come up in Google Scholar.
Okay.
Because they would be so that would be like a published, your Oregon State published it publicly, like it's not
So the Oregon State published my dissertation, but the individual journals, like the academic journals, published the different articles or the chapters of my dissertation. And so, like, I published one in Transportation Research Part C. I think it was Part C. Testing me here. And then I published one in Journal of Surveying Engineering, and then I published one in the ITE, or Institute of Transportation Engineers journal. And so you could look through those to find those articles.
That's very exciting. We have had a published writer on our podcast now, Jake. We are climbing quickly.
Your drone research, was it like conclusive of anything, or I mean, like, did it like, all right, more drones in the sky directly correlates more car wrecks every year?
My kind of base recommendation was you shouldn't fly drones within 50 feet of the edge of a roadway, because I saw a spike in duration of glances drivers had away from the roadway toward the side of the roadway when the drone operations were within 50 feet.
Okay.
So that's kind of like the base conclusion of the whole thing.
Sounds a lot shorter than 200 pages.
Yeah, I mean, there were other pieces of it. I mean, it takes a lot to write about your methodology, and I did kind of a follow-up study on different like sign alternatives, like road signs. So if you were gonna, like, basically like an alternative to a road work ahead sign for a construction site, I made like drone survey crew signs, and so I designed like 6 different options, and then did some survey work, like did a little questionnaire survey to see which ones people like understood or preferred. And then I tested some of those in the driving simulator as well to see how people reacted to different configurations of those signs. So there was like multiple levels of the dissertation, not just like, are people distracted or not? But that was the basic question.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel safer, for sure.
So then, this is the exciting part, obviously, for us and our listeners probably. What are you doing now? How would you describe your move from getting a PhD to move into Sholo, Arizona, to start working at an engineering firm?
There aren't a lot of PhDs that move to Sholo, Arizona. Not a real common move. When I told my advisor I was moving here, I had to kind of sell it that that was a good idea. I don't know that he was quite convinced, but it was. I mean, it was an awesome opportunity for me to get to come live near the in-laws and move back to my wife's hometown. So I think she was more mad than I was. Like, I think she was less happy with the idea than me moving back to her hometown. But the chance to work at the engineering firm, the family firm, was like a really neat opportunity, and couldn't complain about kind of the experience that I'd be able to get with the job, which has been pretty unique. And I can talk about that too if you guys would like.
That's exactly.
Oh yeah, that's
strong, man. I have a 4-hour minimum window from either my parents or my wife's parents. Right now, I'm in Pittsburgh, and it's 3.5, and I feel a little uncomfortable.
Always, just always a little on.
See, I think we're like 3.5 minutes. 3.5 minutes to the in-laws' house. So,
well, there's no in-laws' house. You work for my dad. You work for your father-in-law. And I mean, it's
true. I see him every day.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess to be clear, Zach's working at Ironside Engineering, which is the firm my father started in 2000 or so. My dad's a civil engineer. For listeners who don't know yet, my sister's actually also a civil engineer, and then now my brother-in-law is a civil engineer, and so that's why I chose mechanical. I really branched out. But yep, big branch. So working at Ironside Engineering, Zach, what have you been working on? You started last July, so you're coming up on 1 year, I believe.
Coming up
right?
on a year.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then it's pretty small, so you've kind of been involved in every project that the company's done since you started, I think. And so, like, what are some of the opportunities that you've had at Ironside Engineering?
Yeah, and I guess I'll kind of first talk about how, it was a little bit of a shift from what I was doing in grad school, because grad school was very theoretical, and I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of computer coding. I had to do a lot of computer coding with the driving simulator, which is definitely not what I was majoring in. I also, I focused in traffic and transportation, and so I was kind of all in that world. The further you get into school, the more specialized you get. And so, while my degree is in general civil engineering for my master's and PhD, I pretty much only took traffic and transportation classes, and my research and work was all in traffic and transportation. So then to go from that world and jump back out into kind of the general civil world was kind of a big shift, because I hadn't even thought about a lot of those other types of civil engineering in quite a while. And so when, it's my first couple months there and I got to go work on designing a sewer line, and I have to work on, doing some land survey projects, and I have to go out and learn how to design a well. All those things were definitely not learned by me in school. And so it was a pretty steep learning curve for the first few months, but it was also a really awesome learning experience to get to do some practical stuff, get to kind of break out of the research academia world, and kind of get my boots dirty and get out in the field a little bit with some surveying, and also get to crack open a couple, textbooks from college and try to learn some stuff about, water resources engineering and different things like that. So, it's definitely broadened my experience base, which has been really, really cool.
Okay, so I guess one of my questions about civil engineering, if you were at getting your bachelor's in civil engineering, do they actually teach you that stuff in class, and then you know how to do it once you go out in the field, or do you still have to end up getting the experience before you know how to do it?
You for sure have to get the experience once you're, in the job figuring it out. I've been in school long enough that I kind of developed this philosophy on school that the degree doesn't really help you a lot with the practical knowledge of how to do anything. All it really does is give you the understanding of the vocabulary to be able to have a conversation about the different projects, to be able to learn efficiently and effectively on the job. And so that's kind of what I think the purpose of school is. And I know a lot of people have different thoughts on how valuable or not engineering school is for the career. But I do think that it's helpful in terms of just learning the vocabulary of the profession and being able to learn to ask good questions when you're doing the job.
Okay, I mean, I feel like that's how I feel about school. Like, I don't know. That's how I feel. I feel like my wife would disagree with me in terms of schooling and its importance. So,
yeah. So I was going to say, kind of similar question to Jake's. Do you think the 4-year gap is kind of what, would you say that made your learning curve steeper because you were just further in time from even like the vocabulary stuff you're talking about, like just having 4 years off from that, I feel like may have made it harder for me at least to learn that.
I don't necessarily think that it did. I think kind of the nature of the job was what made the learning curve as steep as it was. Like, there are very few engineering jobs, especially entry-level engineering jobs like I theoretically have, that have you do such a breadth of things. Like, when you're at such a small firm and you're involved in all the different projects, there aren't a lot of firms that give kind of entry-level workers that breadth of experience. And so I would say that for most people, the learning curve isn't as steep, mostly because there aren't as many areas of learning.
That makes sense. That makes sense that you would have a steeper learning curve just being on more projects.
I have another question about education-wise. Did you ever get do you have your PE at all in civil engineering?
So I don't yet. So the way it works in engineering is you take your fundamentals of engineering exam, the FE exam, and you can take that kind of right around when you graduate from college. And so I actually took that and passed that between my junior and senior year of my undergrad. Okay. So I've had that for a few years. And then it differs state by state as far as how much experience you have to have before you can get your professional engineering license.
Right.
And so especially when you go to grad school, because different states count grad school experience as different levels of experience. So like when I was in Oregon, they would count, you have to have in general 4 years of work experience in order to get your professional engineering license. And in Oregon, they counted your master's degree as a year of experience and your PhD degree as a year of experience. And so I'd only have to work 2 years after that in Oregon to get my professional engineering license. In Arizona, they count all of grad school as 1 year of experience, which is a little bit of a bummer. So I have to work 3 years here before I can get that license.
I was going to say
that's only 2 years.
It's kind of a bummer. I feel like you should.
It is kind of a bummer.
A little more a difference between a master's and a doctorate. Like, you know.
Right? I think in Arizona should give me the extra year.
Yeah. At least half a year.
Right.
Jake's wants to go in there and negotiate. We'll settle on 1 3/4 years.
Well, I mean, it doesn't make sense if you could go to get your master's in 2 years and then go back and get your doctorate and still only get 1 year of experience. That doesn't seem fair.
It makes sense though, because I think the part that we kind of glazed over was the 4 years are supposed to be under a professional engineer. And so it's not just work experience. Like if I'm like at SRP, I can only count the times where I'm working directly under a professional engineer. And so
yeah, that's a good clarification.
It's really designed at making sure you have hands-on experience, that it's not just the same experience you got in school. And so I can see why they wouldn't want to count a 1-to-1 ratio on the grad school. I think it is valuable experience and should be counted maybe a little heavier than 1 year. I'll give Zach that. I think it should be 2. But but I don't think it should count as all 4.
Is there like a stipulation after you work like 20 years in the field, you can take the test? Or is it like it has to be 4 years under a PE?
There is because the 4 years is after you have an ABET accredited engineering degree. You have to have that degree plus the 4 years of experience under a PE. There are, and again, it's different in different states. Every state is different in that regard but there usually is an option for how to get your professional engineering license without having gotten an engineering degree.
I didn't know that. I think you can.
For some reason,
I think you. Go ahead, Jake. Okay. I think you can also, like talk to the board or like present a case, because I worked with an engineer he was a mechanical engineer, and he didn't get his PE till like he was, he's older, 50. He'd been working in engineering for 30 years, and they waived, I think they waived the FE exam for him or something. Like they waived an exam. Like they're like, okay, you have 20 years experience under a PE, and they only made him take the PE exam or something. I think they will work with you a little bit if you are in a special case.
I was just going to say, I think in Oklahoma, there is like a limit where if it's over 10 years in the field, you can take the PE exam, depending on the board's review or something.
With no engineering degree?
I don't know about that. Because the reason I was thinking about it is my uncle has a engineering degree, and he took the FE, I think, but he's never worked under PE himself. But I think he has like enough years of experience to go back and take the test if he wanted to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's what I was thinking. So at Ironside Engineering, what are, I don't know, most of the projects you're working on right now?
So mostly we do like little, kind of historically the firm has been set up to do subdivision development. And that's kind of been its bread and butter over the course of the firm's life. So we do a little bit of work in that now, and so I have a little bit of some projects related to that type of work now. We do a little bit of surveying work, so that gets me out in the field a little bit, which is nice. Some of that is related to the engineering side of other projects, and so we have to go out and do some surveying in order to do the design for certain projects, and so that's part of it. Also working on some environmental permitting. And so looking at, we're doing a couple of what's called Section 404 permits. And that's for, doing projects that are going to impact streams or other waterways. You have to go through kind of the environmental permitting process for that. And so we've been involved in that process. So that's what I've been taking up most of my time lately.
So that sounds, if you're doing environmental studies on water, that's a bridge or what are you building?
Yeah, a bridge.
Okay.
They usually
cool.
are. They're not always, but they're frequently bridges.
Will you design that? Will Ironside Engineering design that bridge, or will you guys like contract that design of the bridge out?
We will contract the design of the bridge out. So we will in-house do the design of the roadway leading up to the bridge, and then the actual bridge structure itself will subcontract out that to a structural engineer. So we could
structural.
Yeah. So, and you could, as a civil engineer, stamp the design for a bridge. But Cole's dad doesn't necessarily have the experience in bridge design and doesn't feel like that's under his area of expertise. And so he doesn't feel comfortable being able to stamp a bridge design. And so we subcontract that out to other firms. There are plenty of firms that specialize kind of in structural and bridge engineering. And so it's best to leave that to the people who do that kind of project all the time. It's safer that way and more efficient kind of for the project as a whole.
That makes sense.
Are you involved in the bid, I guess, a request for proposal for those? Do you help write those proposals with all your writing experience? Like, do you think, one, that has helped you, what you've done in the past, but then also, two, do you have the opportunity to do that?
I do have the opportunity to do that and have done some work putting together proposals. I would say that's pretty different than academic writing. And so I don't know that my academic writing experience necessarily helped with that, because it's just a very specific language. It's kind of a new process of writing to learn how to put together successful proposals. And so I would say I'm still on the learning phase of figuring out how to do that.
Okay.
So I guess how busy are y'all at Ironside Engineering? How much work are you like currently working on now? Or like are you constantly bidding stuff and constantly bringing on new work, or do you like take a project, do all the engineering, and then bid another project, do the engineering, or do you got several in the works?
It's usually several in the works, like trying to kind of constantly keeping a stream of trying to go out and find some projects, and you hit on some and you lose on some, and then doing the work for the projects that you have bid kind of simultaneously. And also, like, a big part of the business is kind of just waiting for the phone to ring for people that you've worked for in the past who are doing new projects in the future. So we get quite a bit of return customers. And so they'll, like, if they've worked with us in the past, they'll come back and want us to do their projects again. And so that usually doesn't involve doesn't always involve a competitive bid process to, put together a proposal that's going to be competing with other proposals, for the work. And so those are kind of the different pieces that kind of all go into play of keeping us busy. But I feel like we're pretty busy. I definitely have plenty of work to do on a day-to-day basis.
So, for those proposals, is there a lot of competition in Show Low, Arizona? Like, do you have another local company you're competing against? Or is there a big, like, outside engineering firm that bids on these designs and you're competing against them as well?
So with the smaller projects, there's like one other firm in the area that we compete with for kind of the smaller local projects. For some of the bigger projects, we will compete with firms mostly out of Phoenix, where kind of all the big names in engineering are. No, excuse me. So we will compete with them as well. That one's a little bit trickier because they have better name recognition. We can usually have a lower price just because if the projects are up here in Show Low, it's more expensive for them down in the valley to be able to design them. It's cheaper for us being up here already. But it's still pretty competitive a lot of the time just because the name recognition of the bigger firms helps get them work a lot of the time.
Okay.
And then I guess this is kind of a loaded question because I already know the answer, but are you kind of starting to maybe help branch the company outside of those subdivision, kind of what it's done in the past with all the subdivisions and kind of pushed it into maybe some research possibilities and tying in some of your traffic and research experience and bringing that kind of business into the company?
Yeah, I would say I'm working toward that. I don't know how successful that has been thus far. But yeah, I think it'd be cool to kind of bring a little bit of a research side of things, and do some of that work, maybe partnering with universities, to be able to do some of that. And that kind of stuff takes a little bit of time, to kind of, the research world moves pretty slow a lot of the time. but also like we have had opportunities to take a little bit more traffic related work. And so I've enjoyed being able to do a little bit of that. And so I'm trying to keep pushing us toward that type of work and doing a quality job in that type of work so we can keep doing it in the future.
Mm-hmm. So for the research work, is that like you're writing up a research proposal that you're trying to get a federal grant for? Or is that like you're trying to get money and partner with a university?
So it's usually federal money. Okay. It can also be state money, state government money that is like grant money for research projects. And then like the way it primarily works is a lot of universities and university professors will put together proposals for those federal and state grants. And sometimes there are opportunities for consulting firms to also either be a partner on those proposals or do those proposals themselves for those federal and state grants.
Okay.
Sweet.
The other thing I was wanting to ask about is, so I know in Arizona there's a lot of reservations, and I didn't know if, as an engineering firm, if you're not on the reservation, can you do work on the reservation?
Yes, we can. And like our firm, there's a reservation that's maybe about 45 minutes from where the office is, and we have done work. We've done work in the past for them, and we have a couple current projects with them on the reservation now. And so, yeah, that is definitely an option because there's not on the reservation here, local to us. There's not an engineering firm on the reservation, and so if they're going to be doing engineering work, they're going to have to either use their in-house engineer. They have an engineer on staff, but I don't think they do a lot of design type work, the engineer on staff. And so if they're going to need any design type of work, they usually have to find a consultant to do that work.
Okay. Are there any stipulations for bidding for jobs on the reservation, or?
Not really, no. I mean, I think that they would definitely have a like preference to hiring native-owned firms, but there aren't necessarily a lot of those, and so, especially locally, I don't know how much that happens.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I was wondering is because my granddad's construction company, sometimes they bid on work for the Choctaw Nation, and even if they're the lowest bidder, there's a preference to go to another construction company that maybe have a percentage of Choctaw ownership or something. So I didn't know if it was the same thing for reservations.
And for sure it would be that way. And I think that is probably more prevalent in the construction of engineering projects. It's a little bit less in the kind of professional design world, just because there aren't a lot of engineering design firms owned by Native Americans in this area.
Okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that there's any actually, and so they're just really, if that did exist, they would for sure kind of have a leg up in getting the work on the reservation. But because they don't exist, like we would have a chance to do that work instead.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I think I do know there are requirements for Native workers at the companies that do the construction on the reservation. And so there are definitely laws like that in place on the Arizona reservations, but it doesn't sound like it affects Ironside Engineering's business down there.
Okay.
So what does kind of the average day look like for an employee at Ironside Engineering? You know, are you required to wear a suit and tie and show low? Are you spending all day at the computer? You mentioned kind of going out in the field and doing some survey work. Kind of what's your average over the last year, would you say?
Rolling into work at like 10:30, maybe 2:30.
Yeah.
Oh man, no. So my schedule, which I like, figured out with the boss what I kind of wanted to work. So I work 7:30 to 7:30 to 5:30 Monday through Thursday, and then I try to get off like a little bit early on Fridays, maybe like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Sometimes I'll try to, like, if I'm trying to do something that weekend or get out of town, I'll leave at noon. Sometimes if we're really busy, I'll stay till 5. So it just kind of depends on that. But that's kind of my general schedule. What I wear to work, I usually wear a button-up and jeans. I kind of set my own dress code. So
That's nice.
and I elected for there to be casual Fridays, so I usually wear jeans and a nice t-shirt on Fridays.
That's an executive decision. I like that.
That was my executive decision that we should have casual Fridays. Yeah. So, and what was the other part of your question, Cole?
Kind of what
the day-to-day
what work are you doing? Yeah, and then also, like, I like to kind of get a feel for like screen time. Like, how much time are you spending sitting at the desk doing design work versus, in your case, like field surveying?
Right. Yeah, so it kind of goes a little bit in phases. So when you're like with a really small firm, it's just kind of like as each project comes around, you got to do what's necessary to get that project done. And so that kind of means that, some weeks it'll be like a whole week where I'm just working in AutoCAD. And I want to like gouge my eyes out because I'm just staring at AutoCAD for, 9 hours every day. But then there'll be some weeks where like, we have to go out and do this survey, and maybe that survey takes 3 days. And so there'll be 3 days out in the field doing that survey. And that's, could be the majority of a week in that regard. And so I'd say it kind of goes in phases. I would say it's definitely mostly office work. I probably get out in the field 3 to 4 days a month. So like once a week, I guess, on average.
That's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, I get a day out in the field, which is nice. Definitely breaks it up, and I like having a little bit of that balance. And then the office work can kind of be broken up. I do a decent amount in CAD and, doing the drafting for some of the projects. And also we have to write up reports and write up proposals. And so that's kind of the other, and then, emailing and other administrative stuff, is the other side of the office work. And so those are kind of the big pieces of what I do.
I tell my boss every day, if I didn't have to answer emails, I would be so much more productive. I would get so much work.
Oh.
They don't.
Yeah, email. I think I like I know if I've worked with some people that do check email a few times a day. Check it when they get in. Check it at lunch. Check it when just before they leave, and kind of schedule just like a couple. I mean, it's a couple 3 hours a day of just writing emails, but it's kind of scheduled time, and they say it helps them be more productive to just not even look at the email when they're doing other stuff. But I don't know how feasible that always is.
I might have to change my approach.
That's not how you do it, Jake. You stop everything to answer emails?
Oh, no, I don't. I just leave the email tab open, and I can just see the notifications just firing in. Every
ding.
Ding, ding, ding. And it's even
cool.
worse if my boss is working remote. He works remote 1 day a week. That day, and specifically, he sends out just firing out emails.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, it's a lot of email. There's a lot of emails out there in the working world.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to ask, Cole?
Oh, I was just going to go with the typical salary question, but I think you have a really interesting perspective, just with the various experiences you've had, but then also kind of the varying levels of degrees you've used. So maybe just like answer to like because you could be a professor. I mean, you have a PhD in engineering, that's professor, and then maybe answer what those kind of make maybe nationwide. I don't know if you applied to any jobs, and then what like a rural Arizona starting civil engineer could expect to make.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on, or I guess for the going into the academic world, it kind of depends on the type of school you want to go be a professor at. So you could go be a research professor, and so all the big schools, like the big state schools like Oregon State, Virginia Tech, those are all, tier 1 research schools, and so they're going to have engineering focused faculty. And so if I didn't actually apply to any faculty jobs, but those are one option. And then you could also work at teaching universities where they do very little or sometimes no research work, and it's all just the teaching side of things. And so for those universities, the teaching universities, the salaries are generally lower, I would say. And I again didn't really apply to any of these schools, but I would say those are kind of in the 65 to 80 range starting, kind of depending on the tier of school that you go to and where it would be located. And then for the research jobs, like if I was to go get a professor job at Oregon State as a research professor, the starting salary is usually around 85 a year for those, and you can make additional money on that from the research grants that you bring in. And so as a professor, you can supplement your salary from the university with like a little piece of the research grant pie. So you can do pretty well, especially if you do a lot of research work at big universities.
And by supplement, do you mean like 10% of the research grant, or how does that pie
No, it's
figure out?
For sure not 10% of the research grant.
Jake almost went and got a doctorate.
The way the research money works is the group that the university itself takes the biggest cut of the research grant pie. So they kind of take a big chunk off the top, and then most of the money goes toward paying grad students. So the money I got paid as a grad student was paid for my tuition, and for my living stipend was paid out of the grant. And then I would say kind of last on the pie chunks. You can also buy equipment and stuff like that with that money, and then kind of finally is the professor gets a chunk. And so it's usually not too much, but if you have enough grants, like even if you made like 10 grand a project, you can still add that up pretty quick.
Yeah, supplement.
Yeah.
Just applying for all the research grants.
Is that a feasible position for you to have, or could you have pursued that feasibly after just your PhD, or would you have had to do more something? I don't know.
No, I could have feasibly done that. I don't know. If I was to go to kind of a top tier research university, I might have had to do what's called a postdoc, which is essentially continuing to be a PhD student doing research, and you get paid a little bit more, but you don't have to take classes. And it's just kind of usually a 1 to 2 year stint that helps build up your resume and your publications in order to get a better research position job. I probably would not have, if I was going into the academic world, I would have just kind of shot more for low to mid tier research university and not opted for the postdoc route.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What about civil, just straight out of college, bachelor's degree, civil engineering? What could they expect, I guess?
I mean, I would say that varies widely based on where you live. But I would say in the kind of broad range of low 50s to low 60s, starting with a bachelor's degree.
And that'd be the private sector then, you would say? Or would the government and private be very similar in that?
I would say they're pretty similar. In my experience, they're pretty similar. Private is, I would say, usually a little bit higher, but I think the disparity is a little bit more kind of at the more experienced levels, kind of the entry level is pretty similar. Although I would say the private is probably a little bit higher, but not substantially so.
Okay.
All right. So once you get your PE professional engineer license, how big is that bump?
I would say it's right around 10% salary bump for getting that license.
Wow.
That's good to know.
Yeah, that's cool. And I guess we maybe all have a better idea of this because we're all engineers, but civil is one of the more important ones to have a PE in, correct?
Yeah, I would say it's of the engineering, that's probably the most important to have a PE, and just because so much gets stamped and more so than in other engineering fields.
Yeah, mechanicals can go their whole career, be very successful, and never have a stamp.
Yeah.
And you and not work for anybody. Let's say if that's kind of the goal, you could own your own mechanical engineering firm and kind of do some stuff without a stamp. But civil engineering, you always have.
You have to have a stamp to own your own firm, and a lot of government civil engineering jobs, the PE is a requirement for a lot of those jobs, and so it's very, even if they don't necessarily use the stamp a lot or ever in that job, it's required in a lot of positions.
Okay.
Yeah. In biomed, there's not even a PE exam for us, so there's that.
Whoa.
You could take the mechanical. You're smarter than I am. Shit.
Yeah. That'll be what is it? Who's the king of an island full of blind people? The one-eyed man or something?
I've never heard that, but I guess it's true.
Somebody said that to me one time when I was asking them about getting a PE as a biomed, and they're like, well, you could be the king of an island full of blind people. You'll be the one-eyed man. All right, whatever you say.
Man.
Whatever you say. That's hilarious.
Yeah. So, Zach, over your education from like going into civil, and then civil bachelor's to master's to PhD, and then moving to Arizona. What is there something overall, or I guess a group of things that you wish someone would have told you at any point before your career, while in your career, while in master's, while writing your PhD?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really didn't have a good understanding of what grad school even was when I was an undergrad, especially that it could, like, depending on what you go into, how you can get it paid for, like, there was just no concept of any of that. And so that was kind of like a weird thing to try to figure out as I was trying to learn, like, because I was just like going into grad school, I was like, well, maybe I'll look into historic preservation, maybe I'll look into civil engineering, like, it's all just grad school to me. And then I realized as I was going into it, like, whoa, there's like actually a really big difference in what the experiences are and what the funding situations are between those two. And so I kind of wish that would have been explained a little bit more to me, kind of early in college as I was trying to, swim my way through figuring out what I was doing.
As you're navigating these paths.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Was there anything, I guess when you went for your bachelor's in civil engineering, did you know you wanted to go into civil engineering? Was there at any point you were like, well, maybe I should have gone into something else, or?
Not really. It was good enough for me. I wasn't like, super enthralled with civil engineering, but I was like, I like this, and there was enough variety in civil engineering that I was like, even early in college when I didn't even really have any experience with any of the different parts of civil, I was like, there's enough in here that I know that I can find something that I like. And having the opportunity to work at VDOT really helped me even more than school did, and trying to figure that out and having the opportunity to work in all of those different areas and being able to find like traffic engineering and figure out like, whoa, like I really do enjoy this, and like this is kind of the direction that I want to take my career. That was really helpful for me. And so civil, I was always pretty committed to it just because I knew it was broad enough that I'd be able to figure out something in there that I wanted to do.
Gotcha. I mean, that makes sense, and that seems to be a pretty common thread from everyone that we've interviewed so far. Is just once they've had a little bit of experience, they were able to say yes or no, this is what I want to do, or this is not what I want to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Jake, do you have any more questions for Zach?
I mean, I think he pretty much answered basically all of my questions. Overall, I think, you answered everything I got.
Yeah, well, I think you answered my questions as well. Gave us a really good idea of a lot of different things that a civil can do. I think you have a very broad experience, especially for technically only being out of school for a couple years. But being a few more.
Only 1 year out of school.
Oh, that's crazy. It's hard for me to think about going to that much school, but
Zach,
it's pretty cool. You've learned a lot.
I'm 27.
27. So, I guess you went to college when you were 18. So 18 to 26.
Yep.
How many years is that?
It's 8, Jake. 4 plus 4 is 8, man.
Yep. And that's a lot faster than most people who go to grad school. So
I was going to say, I have a brother-in-law who he's still in school now getting his PhD. And, I don't know how much more he's got.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some people can take like 7 or 8 years just for their PhD. So.
Nope, not for me. Not for me.
Yeah, that was not gonna. I would have not made it through the gauntlet if that was my experience.
Well, okay, so I guess I have a quick question about PhD route versus just going to work in civil engineering. Is it? Mm-hmm. I guess if you want to be a researcher or work at a university, it's worth going for your PhD. But if you don't want to work in a university or do research, then you're probably will make more in the private sector, not in the private, in the non-academic sector, correct?
Yeah, I would say, like, I for sure do not need to have a master's or a PhD to be able to do the job that I'm doing right now. Like, that would not be a prerequisite for, just doing an entry-level kind of general civil engineering job. Most civil engineering jobs don't require grad school at all. I would say maybe the only exception to that would be a lot of structural engineering firms like their employees to have master's degrees. But yeah, it's definitely not. The only real reason you would need a PhD in civil engineering would be to go work at either a research branch of a state DOT or work at a university. That's pretty much the only options, except for the weirdos like me who get the PhD and then don't do either of those things.
Hey, you're a doctor, man. I will never hold that title.
Nope, nor will I. Out of us 3, you're the doctor.
Hey, well,
they can't take it away from me, so.
Exactly, they can never take it away from you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All of my questions. Cole, do you got anything else?
No, thanks for joining us, Zach. It was a pleasure.
Yep, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
All right.
Let's see y'all next week.